Welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Simone Gold. Ma'am, thanks for hopping on.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's your first time on the show, so I don't think with my audience you need any introduction, but I don't make that assumption anymore. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, and a shout out to a couple members on my team who listen to you regularly. And they said, you have to go do Shaun Thompson. So, yes, was an emergency physician for 25 years when COVID years came about. And I was watching the massive disinformation and propaganda that was being spewed by our public health officials and by the medical groups and the doctors around me, and it was highly alarming. So I organized other frontline doctors like myself to speak truth directly to the American people and, of course, across the world. So you might remember the summer of 2020, we frontline doctors got together in Washington, D.C., and stood on the steps of the Supreme Court in what became kind of an iconic moment known as the White Coat Summit. There's about 25 of us standing there, and we told the world not to be afraid. There's early treatment if you should want it. 6-foot social distancing was completely made up. Masks are not necessary. Open the schools. And honestly, most important, just don't live in fear. There was so much fear going on. And that's the message we came to bring the world. And that was a turning point in my life. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of
Did
my really
did you
calling out the
think
public health officials.
did you think having 25 doctors standing there, being like, "Hey, just don't be afraid, folks. It's not going to be that big a deal." Did you have a different outcome? Well, you probably had a different outcome in mind, but did you see the insanity that was about to ensue after that?
Right. I had no idea. I had no idea what I had just stepped into. Obviously working in the medical system for so long, I knew there were troubles around the edges. I know the system's inefficient and expensive, but I had no idea that there were strong motives to actually do the wrong things for patients. That was at every level. It was from the top to the bottom. The lowly doctor has been incentivized to to do things at the behest of big pharma. And then above him is the hospital CEO who's being pressured by Medicare policies to do something. And above that are the big insurance companies who are manipulating policymakers to make protocols and rules and regulations that benefit the insurance company. And I did not have any idea about that. And to the extent that I knew about the corruption, I really thought that a doctor at the end of the line, putting the doctor-patient relationship first, really could stop the corruption. And I was wrong. I saw doctors do the wrong things for patients. I saw nurses do the wrong things for patients. And that was just a line in the sand for me.
How bad did it get for you? I'm curious. Where I'm sitting is Alberta, right? So I'm up in Canada, and we had our own level of insanity happen through that time. But for an American doctor, I've had lots of different doctors on from Pierre Corey and Peter McCullough and Robert Malone and on and on and on, I guess, of different medical professionals coming on to talk about their own experiences. I'm curious, being there in 2020, one of the 25 to stand up and go, "Hey, folks, just don't worry about this. There's this thing called early treatments." Didn't realize that was going to be a taboo word. How insane did it get for you?
Okay. I think if you were willing to just go along and, keep your paycheck, you could have gone under the radar and it would have been just unpleasant. But if you were sticking your neck out, like the people you mentioned and myself, it got very, very bad. I was fired. Mary Talley Bowden, she was kicked out of her hospital. I know many doctors that were kicked out. 2 of the doctors you named were kicked out of their specialty groups. I myself walked away from my specialty group because I knew they would eventually kick me out. That was emergency medicine. So it got very severe. I do think Canada was worse. The reason I think Canada was worse is that the levels of control that doctors are subjected to, one is at the state level. The state determines if you have your medical license, and that determines if you can practice. Under that is your specialty. So what happened in America is the specialty boards really constricted us. That's what happened to Corey, McCullough, myself, which is our specialty boards constricted us and kind of kicked us out. And I'll explain this repercussions of that in a moment. But as long as you maintain your state license, you can still be a licensed physician and practice. And people like Corey, McCullough, and Gold, we always can find patients who trust us. So you can still practice. In Canada, I actually think it was worse. They were actually really pulling doctors' licenses. It happened in America where they threatened our license, but it was unusual to actually lose your license. In my case, I had to fight the California Medical Board for 3 years on the subject of free speech, but I eventually won and they couldn't pull my license. The problem with them squeezing us on the medical boards, though, our specialty, is that every doctor who works for a hospital has to really be a member of a specialty board. You really can't get privileges at a hospital unless you're board certified. So when you lose your board certification, you can no longer work in a hospital, which maybe is okay for me. Even as a hospital physician, I can go do something else. But think about how bad that is for the patients. Every time a patient goes to the hospital, there no more exists any doctors who are not going along with the medical cartel. They just don't exist anymore. They've been kicked out. So it's pretty severe. On the plus side, I do think it gives opportunities for people to create better systems going forward.
Um, I don't know if I realized this. You were in California then? Are you still in
I was in
California?
California. I fled. I was in a very tyrannical state during COVID, and it led to. I had been living in California for 20 years, but the tyranny was overwhelming, as you probably experienced in Alberta. I would be walking outside, and crazy people running up to you, screaming, "You don't have a mask on," and you're like, "You're 100 yards away. Why are you coming over to me?" It was terrible.
Well, and you had a leader of that state who reinforced those behaviors essentially.
My God, Governor Newsom. First of all, he was a terrible mayor of San Francisco. His track record as mayor of San Francisco was horrific. Homelessness went up, drug addiction went up, crime went up, everything went in the wrong direction. And it was shocking to me that he could win for governorship. Now, you wonder how the elections, if they're valid, I don't know. But I can tell you that he was a horrific governor and a horrific mayor, and then he became a horrific governor. And now he wants to be promoted to become a horrific president. So, we have all the data we need on how terrible a leader Gavin Newsom is.
Now, transitioning to what you're doing today, you got a book out, "The Plot Against the Kids: A True COVID Story." Walk me through this, because when it got sent to me, I was like, "This is interesting." I'm sure there's maybe others that have done something similar, but all the books I have seen, and somebody is going to send me something. I'm sure I'm missing one out there, but maybe you can walk me through this idea, because I feel like it's a little unique take on the years of the insanity.
Yes, I will tell you, nobody has done a book like this. It's actually why I did it. So nobody is nobody really tells the story of really what the political purpose of the COVID policies were. I'm not talking about the fact that there was a virus. There was a virus, SARS-2, just like there have been viruses before it, and there will be viruses after that. Pandemics are a normal part of human history and human experience. That's fine. But the political response to SARS-2 obviously was an attempted takedown of of Western free societies, and I can back that up. I mean, the 6 foot social distancing, for example, was perfectly calculated so that schools had to close. At least the schools in America, you didn't have enough of a footprint in the school's infrastructure to be able to separate children 6 feet. It's actually was perfectly calculated for that. Masks, I think, are a perfect literal and figurative metaphor for silencing the citizenry. So for me, it was very obvious what was going on. The fact that we have such a powerful, what we thought was such a powerful First Amendment, the right to assemble, the right to free speech, and we were seeing churches closed, but Costco open, was very clear to me that we were taking down our country. So I kept waiting for somebody to write a book, an easy to understand book on what actually happened, what was the purpose of COVID. So I wrote this. It's called The Plot Against the Kids: A True COVID Story. Because what happened? You had kids that were walking around and being told to put on masks, and they were scared and they were afraid, or other kids just saw the lunacy of it, but they were having the adults in their life tell them to do this.
Reinforce it. Yep.
Yeah, and that kind of disconnect where you're training the young people to just do things that they really know is stupid and foolish, Or let's say you're in a family where the parents also get that it's foolish, but you're watching your parents have to acquiesce to an all powerful state. That creates a compliant citizenry. That creates a children and a next generation that looks to the government for instruction instead of to themselves, or when they're young to their parents. I saw it directly as an attack on the family, an attack on individual rights to think, and also, the family is the bulwark against an overly aggressive government. So if you can destabilize the family, I think you can destabilize our nation. So this book tells a story in a way that's really understandable for adults and for kids about what COVID policies were really about.
Can
It's
you,
quite charming.
if you wouldn't mind, could you bring the book back up and could you just
Yes,
maybe open it? I was kind of curious because I can see the cover. Can you show me a couple of the pages? I was
absolutely.
kind of wondering if it's a pictures or if it's just a
Totally.
yeah, like
It's totally a children's book. And I just did the Audible book myself. So, although I'm not really sure why somebody would want to buy an Audible book on a children's book, but the publisher asked me to do that. But it's quite a delightful story. We go through the fact that, all the children, they live in a beautiful, lovely, safe town because, the king is taking care of them and the people working hard and they're industrious shopkeepers and clever teachers and children are playing and joyful. The only people who are upset are the plague watchers. There's plague watchers. The plague watchers are unhappy because nobody's listening to them anymore because everything is doing so well. So, what do the plague watchers do? They cook up a solution to make themselves more important. And the story unfolds from there.
well,
Everybody
I
who has seen the book, Shaun, literally gets 10 or 20 copies to give out. It's a
well,
very smart gift to give other people that don't quite understand.
I when I saw it, I'm like, I can imagine a few of the audience are going to look into it. I mean, I'm looking at it on Amazon right now. I assume that's the easiest place for
It
people to
is the
go. But
easiest
you bring
place.
up Audible, and it Audible is probably one of the things I lean on a ton because in here in Canada I drive a ton. Although for a kid's book, I don't think
Yes.
I would. It would
This
probably
one
take
you
me
should
10 minutes to get through. I
no,
assume it
this
wouldn't
one
be
is
that.
short, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, and it's the pictures and honestly, we did test it on children first, make sure they liked it. It wasn't too scary, and they loved it. And then the parents and the grandparents like, oh my gosh, we love this. This is not a book for Audible. This is a book to a book to own.
Yes, and I assume like one of the goals of a book like this is probably to get conversations going between parents and kids. Yes.
Absolutely. I'm very alarmed at the takedown of parental rights. It's something I fight for hard at Frontline Doctors because, as an example, the transgender, mutilating surgeries that are going on, the big problem really is many times they're acing the parents out. They're either literally moving the parents aside by letting children sign up for these things, or they're lying to the parents so aggressively that the parents just kind of go along. So and during the COVID years, we saw the same thing. As soon as the COVID shots were available to teenagers, you had certain local jurisdictions that were allowing the kids to sign up not only with no parental consent, but with no parental knowledge as young as age 14. So when I see things like that, all I think of is, who do the children belong to? Do they belong to the government, or do they belong to the family and parents? It was very clear that one side thinks they belong to the state. And I reject that. I reject that. First of all, I'm a mom, I'm a citizen, I'm a human. I know that the parents love the children more than the state does. And I reject it also because strong families are what pushes back on a government that gets too powerful.
A question for you, just on today's events or where we sit today. There's been different talk about just in around the water cooler, if you would, and I guess my water cooler is a little different than most, but like whether or not a pandemic like thing could come back in, and whether the population would go for it, anything along that lines. Your thoughts, because like you're one of the doctors that I certainly know who you are, and I certainly know what you're doing in 2020. And I go, okay, you saw this coming well before everyone. Not everyone, but a huge majority of the population. You spoke out about it. You've been down a crazy ride ever since. Do you think it's possible that they could ever enact a similar thing in the I don't know, in the coming years? 50 years later, 100 years later, sure, there would be a generation that forgets all about this and moves on. But like where we sit today, Do you think there's any possibility, like I'm watching Florida and see some of the things they're coming out with? Um, yeah, I don't know, protecting citizens. I would say others will say endangering citizens, but like you see Florida what they're doing, and I might add other places. Florida seems to be the leader on that. Do you think there's any chance that they could have another go of this where it could be enacted to the same extent?
Yes, my response is sobering. I think yes, for there's two reasons. One is there's been no apology, reckoning, understanding from the other side. There's been no acknowledgement and repentance, right? When you make a mistake, you accept the person's apology. If the person asks for an apology and sincerely means it, then you give that apology. There has been no apology sought. There has been no apology considered on the people who've done this to us. So one draws the conclusion that they don't necessarily think they did something wrong. So that piece of humanity is alive and well. They haven't been punished. They haven't changed behavior. They haven't been reprimanded. There's that. To counter that, a lot more people are awake, and that's good. The negative side is the other book that came out this year that I wrote. I have to mention, this is one to get on Audible, and this is Selective Persecution, the Legalization of American Fascism, and of course, Canada as well. My experience from being a COVID whistleblower to J6 to being targeted by the government 20 different ways shows that there's a lot of tyranny already here in America. I unfold in every chapter, I tell a different facet of my story. And you can see that, for example, in the legal system, the judges were lying. The judges were, I don't want to say lying, the judges did not have proper judicial temperament. They were not neutral. They were not listening carefully. The prosecutors were lying, flat out lying. And I give receipts and I name names. They're lying. You had FBI agents who were doing things that they didn't go into law enforcement to do, right? Breaking down the doors of people like myself in a SWAT team raid is absurd. You had nurses who were not doing the right thing for their patients because they were following their paycheck and they were following the orders of their bosses. These things still exist. So it worries me.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. A SWAT team busted down your door?
It's crazy. I really urge you to read my book, Selective Persecution. This book took 2.5 years to write. It's a legal thriller like a Michael Crichton novel. I mean, what I've gone through because I was opposing government narrative is astonishing. I went up against the California Medical Board. I went up against Congress. I went up against the New York Bar. The FBI broke my door down in a very violent SWAT team tactical raid, which, by the way, just to remind you and your audience, I'm a lawyer. I should have opened with that. I forgot to say that at the outset. So everything I watched unfold in the last 5 years, I'm watching as a lawyer and how illegal it all was. As a small example, you don't arrest non-violent, non-gang member, non-criminal history, employed of a certain age, right? I'm not 25, people with a violent SWAT team arrest. It's just not done. If you go and look at the criteria to call in a SWAT team, I didn't meet any of the criteria. So what are they doing? The problem is that infrastructure exists in our system, and that's concerning.
What did they, like you're making an absolute case of picking up your other book now because I'm like,
That's
okay, I got
very much your cup of tea, for
yes.
sure.
Well, I'm like, okay, so SWAT shows up to your door, kicks down the door. What is their reasoning?
Oh, perhaps you don't know or your audience doesn't know. I was an invited guest speaker on January 6th, and I was on Capitol grounds on January 6th. So they targeted me to be arrested. Now, let's take a step back and say I was an invited guest speaker with a permit. That was why I was there. I was due to stand alongside 4 congressmen to deliver a speech on medical freedom. Now, as everyone knows, the day didn't go as planned, but I had a permit. I was there for a reason. I'm not violent. You can see me on videotape giving my speech. There it is. And yet the FBI arrested me, and in the most violent imaginable way. It's lucky, and I'm not exaggerating, Shaun, it is lucky I'm alive. They were, feet away from me, and the FBI officers screaming, uh, hands up, hands up, hands up, or something like that, or turn around. And I was startled. And I took a half step forward, and he could have shot me dead, right? He could have shot me dead. It would have been, you know, justifiable homicide, I suppose. I mean, I was just so startled by the whole thing. And I got to thinking about that episode later, just that small little piece of the episode. Oh, I wonder if that's the intent. You send in a bunch of guys who are way hopped up on adrenaline, because when do you send in a SWAT team? When there's a violent criminal on the other side. You know, if there's El Chapo on the other side, that's when you call these guys in. So if they're coming in and the person's not entirely complacent, you know, immediately, they're primed to think that I'd be violent. So I'm grateful to that officer who obviously assessed the situation
Yes.
and determined, let's not pull the trigger.
Well, I'm spacing on a guest I've had, an American, a journalist who had it wasn't the FBI, I don't think. I think it was state police, but they showed up to his house at middle of the night, 3, 4 in the morning, and it had been a call in from an anonymous caller saying there was, I forget how it went, someone violent in the house. Anyways, he had dogs. Dogs woke him up, and he said he was smart enough not to go to the door and to talk to the cops and be like, "There's nobody here. Nobody's dangerous." Right. And they got on a familiar conversation, and then eventually they talked, but he had video of it as well. And he said basically similar thing. Like, they showed up armed to the teeth, ready to put down somebody who they thought had a gun and was going to use it on them. And your story, as soon as you add in J6, we've had a man on here who was arrested and spent time in prison for J6, and then when Trump got in, got pardoned, and that's an interesting one, because on this side with the Freedom Convoy, Tamara Leach and Chris Barber just both got sentenced to 18 months house arrest. So they're sitting at home, not allowed to leave, a whole bunch of conditions stacked on, that's pretty insane. And here in Canada, we have our similar things. It's the FBI raid that is unnerving, to say the least, I would say, sitting in this chair.
I'm so sorry to hear that, and I want to tell people that house arrest is no joke. It sounds a little bit more bland than it is. It's actually quite difficult. You don't know this piece, but they did send me to prison, and I did go to prison, and I'll have to come back on the show and talk all about it.
Sure.
But the book, The Selective Persecution, I wrote it because I want people to understand, we're this close, right, to tyranny. And once you end up squirreling that path, you can't really pull it back. I think there's an old expression, you can vote your way into communism, but you'll have to shoot your way out. And, we were blessed, the world was blessed that we had a change of administration, because it would have been very, very terrible. But I don't want people to relax, because the infrastructure is still there. What you're just saying, that the Freedom Convoy leaders, 18 months of house arrest.
After the
18 months.
longest criminal mischief trial in Canadian history, and it was
It's
peaceful. It goes on and on. So, I appreciate you hopping on. I know we only have a short time, and I can certainly get not long-winded. I like long conversations and getting to know somebody, and I'd love to have you back on. Before I let you out, if people want to pick up either of your books, Amazon, I assume, but I'll let you. You've mentioned Audible as well.
it's just easier, I think. I hate to say that, but obviously, Amazon is a very easy place. I just want to tell people that I wrote these books for you. I don't do them for any other reason. It's not really a very productive use of time. It takes a long time and research to put these books together. Selective Persecution, The Legalization of American Fascism, tells the story of my COVID whistleblowing through my J6 experience, prison, trial, sentencing, what it's like to be in a women's hardcore prison, because they didn't put me in a mild place. They put me in somewhere very hardcore. And of course, everything that COVID revealed with Anthony Fauci and the lies. It's really a page turner. And then a book to give everybody is The Plot Against the Kids, a true COVID story, my first children's book, which really explains the COVID policies, like what they really did to our families and our children.
Simone, before I let you out, just one final thought. How long did you spend in prison? That's going to bug me if I don't ask it.
Yes, I was sentenced to 60 days on a misdemeanor trespass. And just to put that in perspective, Misdemeanors never go to prison. Not
Yes.
done.
Well, I know on this side we have our own stories of Tamara Leach, who spent over 40 days for mischief in solitary, and so like there is some real rough stories. So I look forward to probably grabbing both books. But you've got me hooked on your story. I think that is very interesting. Your children's book that's come out, a plot against the kids, a true COVID story. I think there's going to be a lot of parents interested in that because I think as a parent myself, it would probably open up some interesting conversations with your kids, which I think is, I don't know, when I look at it, part of the goal, I assume, I said it earlier, but I would reiterate it, is to me, I feel like there will be some questions come out of that, and that'd be a fun conversation to have. Either way, I appreciate you giving me some time today. I would love to have you back because I'd love to explore that story more. I think the Canadian audience would be very
Yes.
inclined to hear more about your story and some of the things you've gone through. But either way, thanks again for giving me some time today.
Thank you so much. It does. I would love to come back. It is a very interesting story. And the plot against the kids, you will love it. Our Surgeon General of Florida, I only mentioned because you had mentioned him. He loved the book, and I market tested it on his 3 children. They love it. It's one of their favorite books. So yes. So keep me posted if your kids like it.
Will do. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.